This week on UpFront, we're tackling two big political dramas. In the US, the battle between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee for president and take on Donald Trump, while in Malaysia, a new prime minister taking office in a backroom deal and controversially pushing aside Mahathir Mohamad in the process. Super Tuesday, the biggest day in the US electoral calendar so far, resulted in a big win for former Vice President Joe Biden and the establishment wing of the Democratic Party that he represents. Biden carried 10 out of the 14 states in play, while independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who was the frontrunner going into Super Tuesday, is on track to win the other 4, including the state with the most Democratic delegates, California. So, with the contest for the Democratic nomination now essentially a two-horse race, which of these two men has the best chance of defeating Donald Trump in November? To debate this, I'm joined from New York by Linda Sarsour, national surrogate for the Bernie Sanders campaign and author of a new memoir, We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. And here in the studio by Lindy Li, a Democratic delegate candidate and member of Joe Biden's policy and outreach team. Thank you both for joining me in the arena.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Linda, let me start with you. Just a week ago, or even I could say just a few days ago, Bernie Sanders was going to be the runaway winner on Super Tuesday. He was the front runner in the race for the Democratic nomination. And yet, on Tuesday, Joe Biden won the votes. He won the most delegates, won the most states. How disappointed were you on Tuesday night as you saw those results coming in?
I wouldn't say that I was necessarily disappointed because I started to see the writing on the wall. Watching over the weekend the coordinated, kind of dropouts of Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and them coalescing around Biden, I think it was easy for anyone who's following this race to see what was going on. So going into Super Tuesday, particularly after the big win for Biden in South Carolina, I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle. I was pretty confident in crushing it in California, which is exactly what happened. I was hoping that we would win also Texas, but because of us coming very close to winning, we are also going to be sharing a lot of the delegates in the state of Texas. So yeah, I wouldn't say disappointed. I would say that I kind of saw the writing on the wall as we went into Super Tuesday.
Lindy, it was obviously a great night for Joe Biden in terms of a quote-unquote comeback from where he had been. He had a pretty disastrous start to the campaign, coming 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire. And yet, even after this success on Super Tuesday, it's still pretty neck and neck in terms of number of delegates. 60% of delegates are still to play for. This is nowhere near done.
But I don't think we haven't seen this sort of comeback in a very long time. It's truly incredible. And I think the American people are speaking, and they're saying, we don't want a candidate whose staff and supporters are rife with toxic individuals. And I know there are so many supporters out there who are good, decent people who just want a better life. But we can't have a candidate who isn't making an effort to build a broad coalition that brings many different ethnicities and communities together.
You don't believe, Linda, that the former Vice President of the United States, who will probably end up having the support of Barack Obama, has all of these other candidates coalescing behind him. You don't believe he's the safe choice against Donald Trump in November?
Absolutely not. I think he has a horrible record. He took us into a despicable war in Iraq and voted for the war in Iraq. He didn't just vote for the crime bill. He championed the crime bill, which is why we have inflated incarceration of black and brown people across the country. He's been working for the last 4 decades to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I don't want to just defeat Donald Trump. I'm tired of the status quo. I'm tired of maintaining what we have. I want health care, Mahdi. That's what I want. Joe Biden right now hasn't told me what his message. What is he fighting for? What are his top policy issues other than defeating Donald Trump?
Let's bring in Lindy and make the point. Is a candidate like Joe Biden, who is so similar in many ways to Hillary Clinton, is that the right way to go, given we kind of tried this approach in 2016, the Democratic Party tried this approach in 2016 with a kind of quote-unquote moderate centrist who has the support of the party, has the support of African-American voters in the primaries, and then look what happened to Hillary Clinton.
So speaking as a young person whom Bernie Sanders claims to be his base, I was turned off by Hillary Clinton in 2016. Joe Biden doesn't turn me off in the least. I'm inspired by him. I'm inspired by his goodness. And I voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016 in the April primary in Pennsylvania because of his focus on campaign finance reform. But over the years, I realized that I was kind of deceived. He's not who he claimed to be.
Okay, let me bring in Linda. Lindy made the point about young people. So let me just ask you this question. The Bernie Sanders campaign has been focused, laser-like, on turning out young people. This was the big argument. Vote for Bernie Sanders. He will energize people who don't vote. He will energize people from minorities. He will energize young people. On Super Tuesday, earlier this week, that didn't happen. In fact, in a lot of the states, youth turnout was lower in 2020 than it was in 2016. Surely that's a really worrying sign for your campaign.
Yes, Mahdi, you're right. Do we need more young people to get off social media and go to the polls? Absolutely. But to deny the type of communities that Senator Sanders and his team have engaged. I mean, we have seen unprecedented turnout from Latino voters who have given Sanders commanding leads and wins in places like California and Nevada. To see the inspiring satellite caucuses in Iowa of Muslims and former refugees who are getting up to vote for Senator Sanders. And can more be done? Always can more be done. But let's be clear, Mahdi, we have no super PACs. We have 0 billionaires that have given money to our campaign. We have had major PACs going against us. You know, Democratic Majority for Israel was running ads against us in all these states. We have anti-Bernie ads all over. We had Mayor Bloomberg putting up ads against us. I mean, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy here, but for young people who are not politically engaged, it seems like that to them.
Okay. Lindy, isn't the problem that at least a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren are putting out ambitious proposals, whereas your candidate has put out the least ambitious proposals of all the major candidates on health care, for example? He didn't go even as far as Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, who left the race. He hasn't really talked much about policy or how he's going to change America. He's just said, you know, vote for me so we can get normality back, so we can go back to a pre-Trump era. But that's not enough for a lot of people.
Well, I would probably moderate that a little bit and say he is putting out ambitious proposals. For example, his ideas on climate change, and he's very, very aggressive on gun violence. Gun violence is, for me, an existential threat, and I know so many voters in America feel the same way. Joe Biden is someone who, helped pass the assault weapons ban, which has been shown to reduce deaths by gun violence. Bernie Sanders voted against that multiple times. In addition, he also voted to prevent gun manufacturers from being held accountable. I don't want a candidate or a president who's being supported in the past by the NRA. It's just unconscionable that Americans walking down the street today cannot. You
didn't, just a very quick clarification.
Yes,
you didn't feel that way
absolutely.
in 2016?
My vote for Bernie was not, as I mentioned, wasn't a vote for Bernie. It was a vote against the establishment. And the 27 at that point.
But why are you now with the establishment?
I don't consider myself.
You don't consider Joe Biden to be establishment?
I'm the granddaughter of illiterate rice farmers.
Not you personally. You don't consider Joe Biden the candidate you support to be establishment?
There's no establishment. I think this is almost like a myth. If there were truly an establishment, Bernie Sanders wouldn't have been able to get as far as he did.
Okay, but you just said you were against the establishment in 2016. Now you're saying there isn't an establishment.
Against Hillary Clinton. Against
okay. Linda, there is no establishment, Lindy says.
I mean, there's absolutely an establishment, and that's the thing, the kind of conversation, an honest conversation that we're going to have during this primary elections, and as we get to the convention, and then trying to coalesce our party or unite our party to try to defeat Donald Trump. We cannot deny the realities. We cannot deny that there are still second ballot superdelegates. There are still party officials who are able to, coordinate endorsements and put money into PACs and endorse certain candidates and have influence on the party. So to say there's not an establishment is I think, not something that's going to help us bring the party together. We have to realize that the reason why Bernie Sanders has gotten as far as he's gotten is also to listen to his voter base. His voter base does believe there's an establishment. They believe that they are disrupting the political system in this country.
Lindy.
To say African Americans who voted in droves in support of Joe Biden as his establishment is just so disingenuous. These people are suffering. These people are middle class or lower class citizens. They are not the establishment. It's just to label them as corporate trash, like they have been on social media and by Bernie Sanders supporters, is just extremely hurtful and not representative of the real situation.
Lindy, every voter matters. African American voters matter. Latino voters matter. So this should not be a conversation, and I hope that your candidate does not support pitting up voters against each other, to say that African American voters are more important than Latino voters, or Latino voters
no one
being
is
more
ever
important
saying
than
that.
African American voters.
Absolutely
the
not.
Establishment, the establishment is not the voters. The establishment is the billionaire donors. It's the PACs. It's the
And
party
it's incorrect
officials.
to say that
those
Bernie,
are the establishment.
It's incorrect to say that Bernie is not supported by super PAC money when he is supported by dark money groups whose disclosures won't be disclosed until after Super Tuesday, and we have no idea who his backers are. There's no transparency, and where are the medical records, by the way? We have a 78-year-old man who just had a heart attack, and there's no transparency, and he promises transparency, he promised disclosure, and we're not getting it.
Let Linda respond.
First of all, Bernie Sanders has provided what he believes to be his full medical conditions at this moment, and I will not answer for him on that particular situation. But you should be very careful, Lindy, representing your candidate and calling groups like the Center for Popular Democracy, Democracy for America, the Dream Defenders, a young black people-led group in Florida. You're calling dark money groups people-led organizations that have been doing progressive work on behalf of all of us, some of them for the last 3 decades.
Lindy, let me ask you this. You mentioned Bernie Sanders' health. Here's a candidate who had a heart attack during the race. He will be the oldest president ever elected if he wins. That's clearly a concern to some Democratic voters if you look at the polls. But another concern is with your candidate, Joe Biden, who for a lot of people seems to be in cognitive decline in front of our eyes. Here's a candidate who makes gaffes on a kind of daily, weekly basis, including on Super Tuesday, who can't remember basic things. It's not as if, you could argue Bernie Sanders has health issues, but a lot of people say both of them do in their own ways.
Joe Biden has struggled with a stutter all his life, and you're
not just a stutter, you know that.
You're from the United States.
He doesn't remember the people that are standing next to him. I'm just saying it's not just a stutter. He does have a stutter. But for example, Joe Biden 3 times in February said that he got arrested in South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela. He then had to walk that back. That wasn't a stutter. That was a lie.
Well, we can call out Bernie on his money lies too. Where are the
we
records?
could, but I'm asking you. I'll put that to Linda in a moment.
I think we would be disingenuous to say that politicians don't shape the narrative. Everyone does it. It's and I think that just.
So does that mean you're okay with Donald Trump also shaping the narrative?
Absolutely not. But Donald Trump is not shaping the narrative. He's eviscerating the narrative. There's a much difference, and I'd rather have a good man who is America's best interests at heart than Donald Trump.
Linda, what do you do about the socialism label? Because a lot of voters say in polls, including Democratic voters, that they're worried about this socialism label. That's why a lot of the party elites don't want to get behind Bernie Sanders, because they genuinely think it will destroy him in the general election, that the Republicans will go after him over Castro, over Venezuela, over Soviet Union. What's your response to that charge?
Because your show is worldwide, I'm actually embarrassed, because in other parts of the world, someone like Senator Bernie Sanders would be seen as a social democrat, would actually be seen like center-left. Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. I'm a socialist. He's not a socialist. He's a democratic socialist.
Lindy, let me ask you this very briefly.
I'm from communist China, and they call themselves, socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's the official Chinese motto. They killed my great-grandfather. So socialism for me strikes fear into my heart. It's a family trauma here. I do not take that term lightly. And what are we going to do about the many instances in which Senator Sanders praises communist Russia? He goes to Russia and comes back and says, I don't see any deprivation.
What would you say to people who say Joe Biden praised Hosni Mubarak, said he's not a dictator in the middle of the Arab Spring?
Americans do not have a deeply rooted sense of disdain for Hosni Mubarak versus socialism.
Okay, that's a political point, but in terms of the morals of it, we're out of time, and I do need to ask you both this question. Linda, you said in an interview last month, because of the experiences you've had online, in particular with some Bernie supporters, you said that if he were to become the Democratic nominee, you said you would not vote for him.
Absolutely not.
So that means you would be, voting Trump, sitting at home?
I'm going to vote blue all the way down, except for president.
So you're okay with a second Trump term?
I'm absolutely not okay with it, but I'm also almost probably equally terrified and traumatized by the prospect of a Sanders presidency right now.
So to the point where you would be okay with a Trump second term?
I'm not okay with it.
Well, by definition, you would be if you didn't.
I'm fighting like hell to make sure that Biden is a nominee. So
except that I'm asking a hypothetical, which I will also ask Linda. If it is Bernie Sanders as a nominee, you will not vote for him, even if it means a Trump second term. Okay. Linda, are you a Bernie or bust, as some people on the left say? Is it Bernie Sanders or no one else for you?
So this is the translation of what I got from what Lindy just said, is that she doesn't care that Donald Trump will be able to appoint Supreme Court justices over his next 4 years and literally take us back maybe 50 to 100 years. So that's what you're saying, because you're saying that you're not
What is your view, Linda?
president.
Linda, what is your view? Are you Bernie or bust, as the saying goes?
I've never been Bernie or bust. I'm not going to lie to you. I might have drew the line at Michael Bloomberg, but I know what's more important. It's not about my little feelings. It's not about being selfish and self-righteous. It's about protecting our communities and protecting generations to come. And I would hope that someone like Lindy would be part of that movement, but I guess she's not.
But just to be clear, you would vote for Joe Biden if he's the candidate come November?
It would be very hard for me, Mahdi, but I would do the right thing. But I would do the right thing, because that is the right thing to do.
Lindy, last word.
You have a candidate who's espousing Medicare for all. He doesn't know. He went on Norah O'Donnell the other day, and Nora's like, how much is it going to be? He's like, I don't know. You don't know. No one knows how much health care is going to be. It's completely, he's being a con man if he cannot provide concrete proposals of specific numbers.
That is not a justifiable reason why you would not vote for a Democratic candidate to beat Donald Trump, Lindy.
Why? He's selling us a pipe dream.
It's not
a
a
castle in the
justifiable
sky.
point.
But he's not the lesser of two evils in your view?
He's not.
OK, on that contentious note, we'll have to leave it there. Linda Sarsour, Lindy Li, thank you both for joining me on Upfront. It's been described as Malaysia's political Game of Thrones. 94-year-old Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad's sudden resignation, only to be reinstated by the king, was widely seen as yet another spat with his designated successor, Anwar Ibrahim. But before long, Mahathir and Anwar united again in an attempt to form a new government, only to find themselves both on the outside looking in as someone else. Muhyiddin Yassin was sworn in as Malaysia's 8th Prime Minister. So where did it all go wrong for Malaysia's political colossus, Mahathir? And what does it mean for the country? Joining me now from Kuala Lumpur to discuss this is Syed Saddiq, a member of parliament who served as the Minister of Youth and Sport in Mahathir's most recent government. Thank you for joining me on Upfront. It's been a wild 2 weeks in Malaysian politics. Just a week ago, your political mentor, Mahathir Mohamad, seemed poised to stay on as Prime Minister beyond the time anyone had really imagined when he came into power in 2018. Now he's gone. He's been sidelined. He's crying foul. He says he's been betrayed. How did it all come to this?
It came to this because of the formation of an illegitimate backdoor government. The fact that without Dr. Mahathir's knowledge, that his own colleagues decided to work together with the well-known global kleptocrats to form a backdoor government and to take down the democratically elected Pakatan Harapan government, I think is truly a sad day for Malaysian democracy.
There are obviously a lot of concerns about the legitimacy of this new government. You called it a backdoor government lacking in legitimacy. It wasn't elected by the people. The Guardian newspaper in the UK, for example, called the King's decision to name Muhyiddin Prime Minister a royal coup. Is that a description you would agree with?
I think it's unfair to blame the Malaysian King. The reality is the leaders who currently claim government came in the wrong fashion, where they presented the wrong numbers to the Malaysian King. For an example, my party president claimed that I support him, that I signed the statutory declaration, including to Dr. Mahathir and Datuk Seri Mukris Mahathir. So when he presented the numbers to the Malaysian King, he claimed that he had 36 members of parliament supporting him among his party. But in reality, that is not the case.
But the Malaysian King did decide, and you're claiming that Muhyiddin doesn't have the support of majority of members of parliament, but the King decided he did, appointed him Prime Minister. Did Mahathir not see this coming? Did he miscalculate? How did this great tactician, who's been around so long, get outplayed by Muhyiddin? Is he out of touch? Is he just too old?
I think it's just wrong for their side to claim that Dr. Mahathir was the architect of this move. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. They said that this move in the end is to protect Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad from continuous attacks from his own partners like Datuk Seri Anwar and DAP. But in reality, Dr. Mahathir rejects this form of government because he wants to work with the leaders which he worked with, which won the last election, not to suddenly open the doors of government to the global kleptocrats to come in. And
you say that Mahathir wants to work with the leaders who he worked with at the last election and the people who came in. Isn't the problem there that, yes, he's kept his promise not to ally with UMNO, who you call global kleptocrats, the party tainted by corruption and lost power in 2018. He may have kept that pledge not to work with them, but he also failed to keep another pledge, which was he was going to hand over power to Anwar Ibrahim. That was the promise he was made. That was what Anwar Ibrahim believed, and he didn't do it. Had he stuck to that promise, maybe you wouldn't be in the situation you are today, so divided and all over the place.
He has. And the fact is that in the last discussion at the Pakatan Harapan Presidential Council, including Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, and Tun Dr. Mahathir was there. I'm a part of the Presidential Council. There was an agreement to give room for Dr. Mahathir to govern, and then when the right time comes, to hand over power to Datuk Seri Anwar. An agreement was after APEC.
But hold on, you say that when the right time came, he would have handed over. When was that right time? Because once he became Prime Minister in 2018, he said 1 or 2 years. Then it became, quote, 2 or 3 years. Then not beyond 3 years. Then not until after the APEC summit. He kept just kicking the can down the road, didn't he?
He's been very consistent.
No, he hasn't been
consistent. He's been very consistent.
He said
all
1
this
to 2
while.
years.
Even
then he
before
said 2 to 3
election,
years.
the agreement.
That's not consistent.
No, yes.
That is not consistent. He said 1 or 2 years. Then he said 2 or 3 years. That, by definition, is not consistent.
Every decision is decided democratically together among all party heads in the Presidential Council of Pakatan Harapan. And the agreement which we had last Friday, last 2 Fridays, is for Dr. Mahathir to govern and to leave after APEC and hand it over to Datuk Seri Anwar. And we agreed as a consensus. Unfortunately, this consensus was not listened to, and in the end, that there are other parties out there who are unwilling and unhappy, and as a consequence, subvert Malaysian democracy.
You say Malaysian democracy has been subverted because a coalition government was formed in a back room without an election. But wasn't Mahathir about to do the same thing last week himself? He was going to form a new coalition that would have maybe sidelined Anwar Ibrahim, and that wouldn't have been a coalition that was picked by the people.
Absolutely not. If Tun Dr. Mahathir really was power crazy, he could have simply just remained as the Prime Minister, and for there to be a change in coalition with him still heading the Prime Ministership. That was exactly what this new coalition wanted. Instead, he stepped down, his moral conscience is clean, and he still fought to ensure
but he's not
that the
retiring.
democratically elected government will stay in power because of the people.
Down, but he's not retiring, and you say he's not power crazy. How would you describe a 94-year-old who is still in office and has been Prime Minister since before you were born?
Because at that point in time, he was given the opportunity to lead this new undemocratically elected coalition. He was given a chance. He rejected it. He didn't want to be a part of the so-called grand architect. What happened after that? He stepped down. He continuously aligned himself with his democratically elected partners and moved in to challenge this unholy alliance which just came in.
Just bigger picture, I want to ask you about what this all means for Malaysia moving forward as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. Anwar Ibrahim's party has long spoken about taking a non-racial approach. When he allied with Mahathir, there was hope that this would be a different Malaysia going forward, especially for minorities. Some would say Malaysia is actually going backwards now under this new Prime Minister and this new government. Are we going to see a new set of policies favouring Malay or Muslim supremacy in Malaysia now?
We'll have to wait. It's not just about race-based policies. If you also see there's a lack of good racial composition or unity in this new government, which I think will be bad for Malaysia.
Coming back to my question about discrimination, in December 2018, when your government was discussing signing a UN convention to eliminate racial discrimination, tens of thousands of Malaysians took to the streets in your country to oppose that move because they didn't want any disruption of the preferential treatment that they get as Malays. When tens of thousands of people take to the streets saying they support discrimination, that's a problem for your country, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's why we need to address it gradually but surely. Under Dr. Mahathir, it was the most diverse cabinet in Malaysian history. We had a lot more women representation. The Deputy Prime Minister was Datuk Seri Wan Azizah. A lot of the key cabinet portfolios were run by women. We had a lot more ethnic representation of ethnic minorities.
Isn't the problem, though, that the undemocratic coalition, as you call it, is led by a Prime Minister who says he's Malay first rather than Malaysian back in 2010, and yet he's a senior member of your party. This is not somebody in your opposing party. This is a member of your party and was on your side until the other day. You can't just disown him now.
Mehdi, he is like a father to me. One of the reasons why I joined politics was because of him. he was one of the persons who spoke up against the global kleptocrats, who was sacked by his party for speaking up against the global kleptocrats. I joined his party as one of the co-founders. My mother was threatened. She was a teacher and she was threatened by the government then. I lost my job, Mandy, as a researcher and as a lecturer. My whole family was threatened. So much money was awarded to me if I decided to join the global kleptocrats then. What truly disappoints me is that today, my very own leader, my father, decided to open the door of Malaysian government and democracy to the same global kleptocrats who threatened me, my family, who sacked him and threatened his family, and now are aligning himself.
I get that. I'm asking a point about race and discrimination. You're saying he's like a father figure to you, and I'm saying to you, when you were considering him as your father figure, he was making some pretty provocative remarks about being Malay first. Would you criticize him for saying that? Do you consider yourself to be Malay first?
I'm always a Malaysian first, but I think it's not wrong for me to be proud of my race, and it is important for me to ensure that especially those who are underprivileged, coming from poor family backgrounds, deserve to be helped and assisted, which unfortunately today are majority Malay. That's why when I supported him, and the foundation of this party is to ensure that poor Malays are well taken care of, but most importantly, one of the biggest founding pillars is to challenge global kleptocracy, to ensure that Malay leaders in Malaysia are known to be leaders of integrity, those who can be proud to say as leaders of all Malaysians and can never be tainted with corruption and mismanagement and abuse of power. That was the reason why I joined this party, and that was exactly the reason why I supported Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, my father.
Syed Saddiq, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you very much, Mandy.
That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.